much for having me here. Good afternoon, everybody. After listening to David, Keng Yong, and then now Sandy, actually, I had to cancel out most of what I wanted to say. And so, my presentation will be fairly short. But first of all, I want to revisit some questions that were asked this morning, right? What do we exactly mean by this rules-based order? And Sandy has pointed out from the ASEAN documents what was meant by a rules-based order. But I like to phrase it in a slightly different way, right? Rather than saying, well, we must obey the rules, right? Or that is rule of law, whether it's interchangeable between rules-based and rule of law. I want to suggest that there are two elements to this idea of a rules-based system. And the first one is that rules, whatever they may be, however you construe them, should be preferred over whim, over what people say, whatever people like, right? The whims and fancies of individuals or of individual states, right? So there is a normative element to it, there's rules, and there's sort of arbitrary decisions on the part of various states. So that's one of the two elements I want to suggest to you. The second one is that a rules-based order, especially when you're talking about a regional organization like ASEAN, necessarily means the subjugation of national sovereignty to these rules. It cannot be any other way. So, if we begin with these two basic propositions, that there should be rules, right? Let's not even worry about who makes the rules yet, but there must be these rules, and that states, once they agree to these rules, agree to abide by them, agree to subjugate their sovereignty to it, and not say that, well, at the time it was a good idea, but not really now, okay? Then you can at least have a meaningful discussion about the construction of a rules-based order. If we cannot agree on these two, I should stop now. Then there's nothing else to talk about. Now let's say we agree. We agree that rules are important. We agree that there are normative values, there are norms, whether it's rule of law or whether there are rules of international law, rules of domestic law that are made common throughout the region, however that is constructed, and that states, once they agree, abide by them, then we have a discussion going. Now, so let us say, all right, there are these rules. What exactly are the rules that we are talking about? Sandy has given us a very comprehensive survey of the kinds of possible rules that may be covered. And if you look at it, you actually are looking at rules from both a domestic as well as a regional perspective. Sandy's presentation has focused primarily on the regional perspective because you're talking about ASEAN and how ASEAN views rules and how states within the ASEAN region look at each other vis-a-vis these rules and normative standards. But I want to suggest to you that there is also a domestic element to it. So let's just take the area of human rights, for example. There is a human rights declaration, a bit toothless, kind of toothless. But many of the ASEAN states have signed on to many of the major core human rights instruments. I'm afraid Singapore didn't sign on to the big two, but we signed on to many of the others, right? But you can say CRC, Convention on Rights of the Child, CEDAW, Convention Against Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, universal, right? And torture convention, right? So you can say, well, okay, at an individual state level, at domestic level, we have all signed onto these treaties. How do we react to this fact as a region, as an ASEAN region? Right now, there is no reaction. But the point here is that you can't sign on to CRC and to CEDAW and not worry about the trafficking in women and children. And that happens at a regional level. very often. Right? So you have to understand that there are several levels of norms or orders, right? Rules that we have to worry about. Are these rules that we are talking about, are these rules also international law? I think David has suggested that they should be, and I would agree with him. That if it's not international law, then what are the law? We are, after all, looking at it from a state-to-state interaction at a regional level. So if you're not talking about international law, then it cannot be that it's Indonesian law or Singapore law, right? It has to be some form of international law or law that we have agreed upon. And ASEAN is too new and young to have developed sort of a jurisprudence of its own as to what ASEAN law is about. So we adopt, I suppose, the standard of international law as the sort of standard practice. Now, if we are to have a rules-based order, and international law provides the backdrop to such an order, then what other problems do we face? One of the problems that we see quite often pop up in the discourse, especially on human rights, and I keep using human rights as an example, partly because I work in this area, and partly because it's full of headaches, right? Is who made these rules for ASEAN, right? So one of the arguments that's always made against some of these rules is that, well, come on, these are imperialist rules, they are rules made by the West at the time of decolonization, and really they don't represent international law. There's a school of thought, some adherents of the third world approaches to international law also suggest that the first world had too much of a role in the making of some of these rules. Well, this is a problem of, I think it's a fallacious problem in the sense that we should not look, and this is the same challenge, right, that people have made against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to say, well, really, that's not universal because I wasn't there. Well, I tell you what, most of us weren't there because at the point in time when the Universal Declaration was made, there were only 55 states in the world. We have 193 in the UN now. So, of course, most of the world wasn't there, but does it mean that just because you weren't there, it's not a good idea? Well, you weren't there when the light bulb was invented, doesn't mean you don't use the light bulb. I mean, that's a really dumb argument. Right? So, just because it didn't come from your head or your ancestors' head doesn't make it a bad idea. We have to assess it neutrally, objectively, and to determine if it is a good idea, it is something desirable for our societies, and how should we then implement it. Right? And of course, this is where the difficulty arises, because we all have very different socio-economic, cultural backgrounds, and so there will be issues in implementation. That one I don't deny. Right? What happens, and this is something which Sandy has touched on and which David asked, if we are to have a rules-based order, then there must be somebody who makes sure that we obey the rules. In the international arena, we know that there is no such thing as an international policeman, no matter what the US thinks it is. There must be a way, a mechanism to ensure that there's some accountability. The ways in which we operate at the international level, there are some, right? We have neutral third-party arbitration and adjudication of disputes, one way of dealing with problems. Another one is the reporting system of the United Nations, which is actually improved a lot over the last 20 years, really, especially with the Universal Periodic Review on Human Rights and so on, where each treaty actually has some form of a reporting mechanism. I didn't know about the AEC scorecard, or rather the scores of the scorecard, but that is not, I think, the kind of accountability that we're looking at. We're looking at a far more serious accountability. And we need a neutral party to be able to do this. And one of the problems, of course, is that although the states of ASEAN think ASEAN is important, I think they don't think ASEAN is important enough. I was stunned a few years ago when I started working on with ASEAN actors on some of these human rights issues, to find that the budget, the entire budget of ASEAN, is actually less than the budget of my law school. Now that doesn't say very much. You could say we are a very extravagant law school, but actually, no, I don't think we are. But that means that ASEAN Secretariat is highly under-resourced. So how are you going to get anything done, do proper monitoring, do proper assessment, review of your performance, if you are not appropriately resourced? So I think this is going to the heart of the problem, rather than, I mean, we could, you know, keep going around to say, well, yes, we want rules-based system, but we never quite got there for all sorts of reasons. But at a regional level, I think many ASEAN states don't think ASEAN is important enough. Right? So I want to add a little bit to Sanji's last slide as to why we have such a poor performance level insofar as implementation of ASEAN of rules and norms within ASEAN. I think the first reason is that for a number of ASEAN states, it's actually seen as being more advantageous to break rules than to obey them. And here I speak from purely self-state interest. Right? So in other words, never mind if I, you know, I upset my ASEAN colleagues, my ASEAN partners, but I might get another 50 casinos in my country. And the investment and the money and what have you. So this is where we have a problem, because when you have a regional organization where states may not think that it would be more beneficial for them to act in the interest of the collective rather than on individual interests, more often than not, then the foundations of your regional organization are very, very shallow, very, very weak. You know, I was thinking, I mean, years ago, about when we were, well, 10 years ago actually, when we were talking about the ASEAN Charter and looking at models, looking at the European Convention and so on. So why is it that we've never really had a good regional organization? And I think part of the reason is geography. We never really thought of the region as a singular region. We live in an archipelagic region. Indonesia, I don't know, how many, 17,000 islands. Philippines, another 13,000 or something. So the region is actually already divided. Islands divide you mentally and psychologically in a way which land doesn't. For those of us who have kind of driven around in some parts of Europe, I don't know what your experience has been, but one of my experiences is that, you mean I've actually driven past this country already? I didn't even know that, I didn't even realize that. You didn't, well, the scenery is kind of like the same, monasteries all look the same. Then you drive and then you suddenly know, hey, I'm in another country, and you actually don't realize this. Now, that's geography for you, okay? And this is not a talk of tourism, but the point I want to make is that when you have a geography that divides you physically and psychologically the way it does in Southeast Asia, it makes it that hard more for you to cohere. It's much, much more difficult to say, we are one. It's much easier if you're all contiguous, you're all, you know, all in the sort of same land mass, and say, well, we are one, right? Much harder than doing that. Look, Singapore and Malaysia is a very simple example, right? The causeway is 1 kilometer long. Okay, if you're a good swimmer, you can easily swim across, right? Or if you were Mas Selamat, you could swim. Sorry, Mas Selamat was a terrorist who had been detained by the Singapore government and escaped and swam across the causeway to Malaysia. It's so near, right? But yet, psychologically, it's another place altogether. So, already, we are handicapped by the fact that we are divided physically in space. And of course, not just physically in space, but also culturally, linguistically, right? Very, very different already. So this is a major challenge to us to think holistically. And this may be one of the reasons why some states are unable to think beyond their own borders, to say, well, hang on, Indonesia, very far away, that could be part of the reason. So how can we make ASEAN more invested in a rules-based order? How can we make ASEAN more interested in rules? Well, I think the first point is how do we make ASEAN states believe in ASEAN more is the first question. This is a real problem. Maybe I'm talking to, I'm kind of what we call preaching to the choir. I'm talking to people who all believe in ASEAN. I believe in ASEAN, that's why I'm standing here, right? But if you did not think that it was important, right, how can you convince people otherwise? Now, few statistics are useful. Today, despite the economic recession buffeting a number of places, ASEAN is still the world's fastest growing area. 5% growth average each year. ASEAN, with the exception of Africa, contains the world's youngest population. Numbers of youth. What does that tell you? That tells you that there's a future. There's a lot that will happen. These young people will grow into hopefully productive adults and things are going to happen. But how then do we make sure that we continue to work as a team? Now, in 1976, when the Secretariat was set up, as Sandy pointed out, in fact, one of the first things that galvanized ASEAN shortly after that was the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. I had never seen ASEAN work the way it did back then. Of course, it was then only ASEAN 5. Right? It was only Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The old ASEAN. But the way in which they mass mobilized was unbelievable. I see many of you in this room who probably don't remember or have any experience of what happened. This is last century, anyway. Right? 1979, after a lot of border clashes and so on, of course, with the terrifying Pol Pot regime in power in Cambodia, the Vietnamese army invaded, okay, and deposed the Pol Pot regime, installed a Vietnamese puppet government. Right? I think quietly everybody celebrated because Pol Pot was gone, or at least his regime, the terrors of the regime had been put to a stop. But the ASEAN ministers were concerned because it was a question of sovereignty. So if it means that just because you run a terrible government, and I can walk in there and kick you out, then you can walk in at any pretext in any ASEAN state and kick out any government. Right? So this was the argument that was made to the United Nations. And ASEAN ran it for years, right, to keep the Democratic Kampuchea representative in the seat in the United Nations on a matter of sovereignty principle. right? Now, is this a matter of non-interference? If it was the ASEAN way, and if Vietnam and Cambodia were members of ASEAN then, what do you think the reaction would have been? You all go sort it out yourself. I mean, cannot be, right? Can you imagine, right? Can you imagine what if one ASEAN state invades another ASEAN state today? What will ASEAN have to say? Oh, non-interference, ASEAN state. See you next year summit, huh? We don't know who's going to turn up. Can you do that? So there must be norms, there must be principles upon which ASEAN can act. And right now, ASEAN is facing not an existential threat, but a real threat. With a number of superpowers, not least of which is China. Okay? And actually, I was aghast a couple of years ago, and there was a big debate in Singapore when Singapore stood up and actually championed the rule of law and said that the arbitration between the Philippines and China, right? Well, we didn't actually say anything about that, but the Prime Minister said, well, we should obey the rule of law. And China began hitting Singapore very hard, right? With all sorts of, the businessmen particularly who were heavily invested in China were very, very upset. Okay? Complained non-stop to the government and so on. And I'm happy that the government actually stood its ground as a matter of principle. When the Prime Minister actually told a group of businessmen, I'm really sorry here, but your interests are not Singapore's interests. In other words, we have to obey the rule of law, even if it may cost us something. So how do we get ourselves more interested in ASEAN? This is a matter which I think the politicians will be better placed than I to do so. But one of the ways in which you can break up ASEAN easily is to basically buy ASEAN up. So, I buy up either the government, I buy up your land, I buy up your coast, and then what's the talk about sovereignty? That's irrelevant. If I own your coast, or I own 1/3 of your coast, what sovereignty are you talking about? I can stop you from moving your military or your navy to the coast, can't I? I can land whatever ships I want on my coast now that I've bought it. So, how do we deal with this? I know there is something called the Asian Development Bank, which provides soft loans and so on for developmental projects. But maybe something at an ASEAN level might be a possible counterweight to the economic power and the money that is being thrown at some ASEAN leaders. I think just this morning, or was it yesterday, South China Morning Post just reported that Duterte is now not looking at China so much now, he's going to India because he was promised 9 billion, but he's got less than 1 billion from China so far. Why do ASEAN states need to go around to other big states to borrow if it can be done within the ASEAN region itself? So, I think we need to find a cause that will bring ASEAN together. And I think the cause is already there. Security is a major pillar in the ASEAN structure. We do have very, very serious security threats in the region, and there's no reason why ASEAN should not come closer together. And on that basis, right, adopt a rules-based system. If the littoral states of the South China Sea all came together, rather than leave the Philippines to fend for itself, or maybe later on Vietnam to fend for itself, or whoever, one of the sort of the contentious states. I think the voice would be a much bigger one. One of the reasons why some states wanted to join ASEAN earlier on in the first place was because if you hunt in a pack, you are likely to get an audience. So if you were, an ambassador in the EU, for example, from a small state, chances of you getting to meet foreign minister of Germany or whatever, not that great. But if you went there, representing 10 states in ASEAN, the Minister for Foreign Affairs would immediately invite all 10 into the room. And that's what I meant by hunting packs. If you had numbers, you become a bigger voice. And in the case of ASEAN, I think this is something we have learned once. I think even a voice of 5, and we kind of forgotten or chosen to subjugate it to state interest rather than to the interests of the rule of law. I can only end by saying, if we do not give enough attention to the rule of law, or take seriously the idea that we should live in a regime that lives under the rule of law, the alternative is a pretty scary one. Right? What else is there? It cannot be the largesse, the generosity of a large state. China has challenged the sort of the bipolar world, but they have offered no alternatives. There is no alternative to the rules